Hello everybody, I am Art and Marketing Lead for DurJam this year, and I'm going to be taking you through a little bit on how to get started with art in your video game. We're going to just be talking about how to get started with the visual process of your game, because I know it's a very difficult thing to get into, especially if you're more biased on the programming side. Art can sometimes be this obstacle that you don't really know how to approach. So I'm going to be hopefully helping with that today. We're also going to be talking about getting started with character design and where to just look if you need help, if you need resources, and also on the technical side, how to get started with what programs you should be using and that kind of thing. So I guess I should probably start by saying why art is so important when you're making a game. So try and think about your favorite game. What elements of it stand out the most? It's probably how it looks, right? Yeah. So art style is a super important thing in games because it marks them out from other games. So if you're trying to make a game, you know, you've got such a big market of other amazing products that people have made. How are you going to stand out? Art style is a great way to do that. Think of a bunch of games like Cuphead, which is a really obvious one because they've got a very distinctive art style. You've also got other games like Terraria, which have a more unique visual style, and they've taken elements of pixel art, and they use a very distinct color palette, and they also include like visual horror and that kind of thing. They create this visual language for their video game that marks them out from other games. So that's hopefully what I'm going to be helping educate you guys in today. So the first thing we're going to talk about is choosing an art style for your game. Now, what do I mean by art style? It's kind of that thing that I talked about earlier. When you're making a distinctive look for your game, you're going for a particular art style. So let me give you an example. Undertale is the big one that I like to talk about because a lot of people know what Undertale is, and it's got a very distinctive look. So Undertale uses pixel art, which is basically a style of art that resembles old 8-bit or 16-bit video game consoles, when graphics was reduced just at a practical level. But people like to emulate that style because it looks good, and especially in certain contexts. So Undertale does that very well. And it combines this with a certain color palette. And the color palette it uses is blacks, whites, and then pops of color. Color palette we're going to talk about a little later on, but color palette and art style go very well together. So we're just going to keep these two elements in mind. So art style, where do you get started? If you've ever picked up a pad or paper or pen or art pad before, you've probably produced some kind of drawing that is in your art style, just your instinctive way of drawing that you've probably picked up from media that you enjoy, other influences, just like TV shows you like to watch, or just your natural way of drawing. And that's just going to be your base from where you're going to go from. Doesn't matter what it looks like. It doesn't matter if you think it's bad, because no art is bad. You're a beginner if you're just starting to do this. Art is a long journey and it's full of ups and downs, so don't worry about it. Be confident, put pen to paper, and give it your best shot. You're probably looking at something after you've done that thinking, maybe that's not what I'm quite trying to go for, but it's a start, and that's really good. Art styles are convenient for us as game developers because we can look at existing pieces of media and say, oh, that looks really great. I'm going to try and replicate that for my game. And that's a piece of advice I think you guys should maybe take on because it's very useful. Undertale, again, great example of that. It's a simple art style that you guys can go away and look at and think, oh, what if my character from my game was in the art style of Undertale? What if the environment was in the same style? It's nice and simple. It's easy for you to replicate on your software. And it's a great place to start. So what do you do after that? You've chosen a style for your game, a visual look. And by the way, if you're having trouble with that, we'll talk about where to go from there in a second. But if you've chosen a style, how are you going to make that work with the concept you have of your game? Let's say you want to make a horror game, and you're thinking, okay, well, I want the style to mix in with the horror elements. Will pixel art work for horror? Sure it will, but you're going to want to make sure it leans away from the cutesy pixel art stuff you're probably seeing on Pinterest and that kind of thing, and lean more into a different kind of vibe. And how do you emulate that vibe, sticking with the style that you like? That's where color palette comes in. So color palette is super important. You've probably noticed it in movies, in Westerns, for example. Westerns often have a kind of beige, dirtier, darker color scheme, lots of browns, lots of natural colors. And that's because the movie makers, when they choose this set of colors, they want it to emulate the environment and the kind of vibe, basically, of the movie that they're trying to create. So again, in horror games. I'm thinking of Limbo specifically, if anybody's ever played Limbo. A great little game, you should totally play it. Monochrome, black and white, very spooky. The audience, when they're playing the game, has to do this thing called visual abstraction, when the game itself doesn't actually give you too many details. It's quite simple shapes, simple colors, again, black and white, like I said. And the audience, the player, has to fill in the details in their mind, which can be kind of creepy if that's the vibe you're going for. So let's take back that example we were talking about earlier. You want pixel art, yes, but you're going for a kind of horror vibe, so you want it to be a bit spooky. Maybe go for a pixel art, yes, but grays, blacks, whites, maybe a little bit of color to mark out details every now and then. That's going to create a really nice ambiance, a really nice vibe for your game that people will pick up on immediately. People associate things by color and by imagery, and that's why imagery is super powerful when you're creating your game, because even just by the choice of color that you choose to use in your video game, you're associating things in the player's mind with what you've created, which will create just natural, I'm using a lot of saying connections over and over again, but it's what I'm trying to say. These connections, these visual connections in the player's mind is going to produce ideas about your game, thoughts about your game that you didn't even expect. So I've talked a lot about pixel art, which is great because, as I was saying earlier, it's super simple, it's very easy to get started with. I'll talk about the websites and stuff you can use to get started with pixel art because, again, it is probably the most accessible art style in terms of just making a game in a game jam where you have limited time, so important things to think about. But there are other art styles that you can choose from. And another one I wanted to mention for those 3D illustrators and model makers out there, low poly is great. Low poly is basically when you have geometric meshes in your game that are super, low poly. There's not much geometry going on there. There's only like a few vertices for each model. Every object that you create, let's say you create an apple, it's not like a hyper-realistic, super smooth-looking apple. It's kind of like chunky, kind of got little spiky edges, but it gives you the general impression of an apple. And in of itself, this is a very sweet and cute art style that a lot of people lean towards and actually choose actively instead of practically for their games. So I highly recommend looking into low poly if you're thinking of getting started with 3D art, which I'm going to mention a little bit. Focus of this presentation will be about 2D art, but 3D art is obviously great and a massive part of the professional game industry, so we will talk about that. Another example I think you guys can have a look at is visual novel art styles, which are literally drawn pieces of art, so that you'll usually have a background piece where an artist will have spent a lot of time making it look very beautiful because that will be the main thing that the player is looking at for quite a while, and then in the foreground there'll be images, still images, drawings in most common cases of characters, and maybe occasionally they'll move a little bit, but there'll not be much animation at all, and there'll be lots of dialogue. So that's a style of video game that is very convenient for someone who's kind of just getting started in art, but also wants art to feature heavily in their game so that they can focus on the narrative aspects of their game as opposed to the kind of heavy core mechanic programming parts of their game. I've made a couple of visual novels and they've been great experiences and also very enjoyable, low-key, relaxed game development activities to do. So I recommend that. So always when you're making a choice between specific art styles, think about practicality first. It's a game jam. You only have so much time. No one's expecting you to produce a masterpiece, a AAA title, super realistic 3D graphics. No one's expecting that. We just want to see how inventive you can be within the time span, and choosing an art style sometimes helps with that because even though you might feel a bit restricted by pixel art, there's a lot of things you can do with it, and it might actually make your whole game a bit more cohesive because you've chosen an art style that works for you and you've explored it a little bit, and that's great to see. So yeah, don't worry about it being simple. Simple is often good, and sometimes less details are more impressive, especially when you're making a game and you only have so much time. It's nice. It's nice for us to be able to see your progress and see how you've been doing with it. And exploring something new is always an impressive feat, so find something you like and go with it. So I've been explaining all this with the hopes that you guys at home have been thinking about what kind of game you want to make. You've kind of got some ideas developing, but don't really know how to pursue them visually. But what if you just have no idea? What if you're completely blank slate, not sure where to go, need some help? Okay, it's no problem at all. Creating any piece of media, any piece of visual stuff is hard. It requires a lot of thought process, and it requires a lot of thought just generally about what you're kind of trying to make, what you can practically make. There's limitations, there's bounds, and there's a lot of things to think about, especially when you have ambitions and you're not sure if you can complete them all in time. So what to do? Pinterest. Go online and go and find Pinterest. Pinterest is basically a website where a bunch of people have posted cool images, a lot of artists have posted what they have created, and it's just this kind of centralized social media, I suppose, for people who are trying to find inspiration for something creative that they're pursuing. So when you are trying to get started with an idea, let's say you know you want to make a game about, it's under the water, right? The setting is deep sea or something like that. You have those words, but nothing else. Go on Pinterest, look up deep sea adventure or underwater art or something like that, and you'll find a bunch of amazing images done by real artists. You might have to get through a bit of AI, and I'll mention AI later, but we're going to be avoiding AI, basically. You'll find really good pieces of inspiration by real artists, and you'll be able to take those, put them maybe in a little mood board, maybe in a mind map of kinds, and put them all together and look at them and think, I want to create something like this. I have my chosen art style, have my chosen color palette. How do I mesh them all together? And it will take thinking, and it will take drafting, and I'll go through the process of kind of creating a character a bit later, which is a good process to follow with any kind of creative thought process when it comes to drawing. But you'll have all of these images, all of these ideas, and it's a great place to go from. So don't be afraid of making chaotic mind maps, putting a bunch of images together that you found online. It's all good stuff. And Pinterest is a great place for it, so I can recommend that. I mentioned AI art earlier, and I think it's a good time to mention it. When you're online and when you're searching stuff, you're going to find a lot of AI art. AI art, for those who don't know, is basically when you go to a website that produces images from prompts. You write in a prompt like, oh, make me an image of a forest, and it will take a bunch of art that it's been fed, and it will kind of regurgitate it into something resembling the prompt that you've given it. And while AI is a useful tool for some areas of like the creative process, actually drawing and animating and that kind of thing, it shouldn't be used for, because it won't, first of all, it just won't create what you want most of the time. It will be near, maybe, but you have to remember this is an amalgamation of a bunch of real artists' hard work that it's basically just scraped together for your use. And while it's really convenient and it's a good tool because you don't have to learn how to draw, it's really frustrating for artists to kind of have to battle with. So by encouraging those websites that create AI images, you're encouraging that whole process, and we don't want to do that. So even though the process of learning to draw can be frustrating, even though it can be tough at times, because you might have to just scrap what you were previously working on, all of that hard work, you just have to put it to one side and do something new. It happens, but that's the joys of the creative process. And it's a fantastic thing that we're able to explore that, and we have the time to do that. So enjoy it. Enjoy the creative process. Enjoy making something, and try not to be trapped by AI, because, yeah, it's very online. Everyone knows about it. And it's very easy to get caught in the trap, so try and avoid it if you can. So the next thing you guys are going to probably want to know about is tools. What software you guys should be looking at in terms of actually making the art we've been discussing so much. And again, I just want to reiterate, we're going to be mostly focusing on 2D stuff rather than 3D stuff, because 3D is a little bit more difficult to get into from a kind of baseline, don't really know what's going on level. And that's totally fine. I'm just going to be mostly covering 2D stuff, but we will talk about where you can go if you want to look more into 3D things for your games. So, starting off with 2D, pen and paper, underrated. You have access to paper, probably got a pen hanging around. Go and draw something. It's great practice. First of all, you might not want to use it for your final draft, final version of your game, I understand that, but it's a really good place to practice, and you can scan in your drawings. You can, get scanning apps, take a picture even of your traditional drawing and draw over it in one of the software apps that I'm going to be talking about now. But it's a great place to start, so don't knock it, give it a go. But in terms of digital stuff, which is the focus of our talk today, first thing I'm going to be mentioning is a website. It's called Piskel. That's Piskel. It's a great little website because you can make pixel art on it. I know I've spoken a lot about pixel art. It's a great art style, as we were talking about earlier, and if you want a way to reproduce it very easily, Piskel is a great place to go to. So it'll give you a little canvas that you can draw onto directly, and wherever you draw, it will turn your lines into little squares. And that's very convenient for making pixel art, because pixel art is just a bunch of little squares. But the main usefulness of that website comes from its ability to make sprites and sprite sheets. Now, this is something we're going to talk about a little bit later when it comes to the practicality of actually taking your art and putting it into the game. But sprite sheets are what you're basically going to be producing at the end of the line. So what Piskel does really nicely is it creates layers, and on each layer you can draw the same sprite, the same little character, with a slight movement, which eventually, if you add enough frames, will create a little animation of that sprite doing something. And that, it will convert very nicely into a sprite sheet. So really nice. We like convenience in the art world because it really helps us, because a lot of time goes into just producing the art anyway. So it's a really nice little convenient website that I've used for a lot of pixel stuff, my kind of own projects. So I really recommend it. Next, we're going to be talking about the software that I would highly recommend as someone who's kind of just getting into, digital art, and someone who's kind of more on the, I think I know what I'm doing, I want something to step up my game a little bit. So entry level, I would suggest Ibis Paint. Some people say Ibis Paint. I'm not sure the right way to pronounce it, but that's fine. I'll call it Ibis Paint. Ibis Paint is a nice little software that you can get on tablets. I think you can get it on PC as well, but I've mostly used it on my iPad. And it's a really nice place to start because the UI, what you're looking at when you're just dealing with the program, is very simple. There's a pen tool, there's an eraser tool, there's lots of other tools that you can use. There's also tools that you can use to do more complicated things. They are there available to you, but the main core of the program just allows you to have a canvas and you just draw on it with your stylus or your finger or your mouse or your art pad if you're on a desktop. And you can just produce great artwork. It's got a layers feature, and it's always being updated by a really dedicated team of developers. So that's great. So I really recommend that if you're just getting into art, because the UI is very simple, very easy to follow along with. And there are lots of tutorials because Ibis Paint is a really popular platform for a lot of people, not just people who are getting into art. Actually, a lot of professionals use Ibis Paint as well. So it provides that medium between people who are just getting started and people who are really professionals. So that's really useful. Fire Alpaca is the next piece of software that I would recommend. Fire Alpaca and Ibis Paint, I should mention, are both free. You can download them onto desktop or tablet. Fire Alpaca, I believe, is just desktop, and I use it with an art pad. So an art pad is basically a very simple bit of hardware that can cost anywhere between kind of £15 to very expensive, depends how into the art you want to get. But my personal art pad doesn't cost more than £20. Little bit of kit. It comes with a stylus and this kind of piece of hardware, this basically piece of plastic, and you just move the stylus on the plastic and it will mimic your pen strokes on the piece of software that you're using. So Fire Alpaca is really great for middle of the line to going into professional artists because it provides the same UI that Ibis Paint does. Simple stuff that you can kind of see immediately and know what it all does, but also it provides more complicated features like different types of layers, which you can do to do lighting effects. It also allows you to do animation. Haven't used Ibis Paint in a while, so they might also support animation now, so maybe go check that out if you're interested in Ibis Paint. But Fire Alpaca does support animation, and it's a very nice little place to get started with animating things with so instead of Piskel, which does pixel art animation, just with your freehand animation. It's tough, but it's really rewarding. So if you're doing a visual novel style thing, you want a little bit of animation, but not too much, would really recommend that as a way to get into it. Yeah, again, Fire Alpaca, free. And another thing that is really useful about it is it comes with a store of custom pens. And that might not mean much to you if you don't do digital art, so let me explain. Pens are different types of nibs. So you've got your pen, you've got the nib that you can attach to your pen right at the end, which is the thing you press down to draw with. It produces different effects when you press your stylus to your art tablet or your finger to the tablet screen. It will produce a different kind of line on the screen. And this can produce lots of different types of effects. So you can have a realistic kind of pen, you can have a pen that mimics watercolor paint, have a pen that actually produces a pattern when you draw with it. So Fire Alpaca basically has a bunch of these pens that are free to access, and some of them are paid to access, but most of them are free, made by the developers and made by independent artists just for you to use. So have a play around, there's lots of amazing stuff on there. The last one I would recommend is Procreate. Procreate is a one-time payment. I think there's also a subscription plan for the premium version, but I might have to check that. Procreate is basically a really, really good high-end piece of kit for 2D illustration. It has a lot of amazing features. Again, like the pens I was talking about earlier, it supports a lot of those, and people make custom ones that you can download. It also supports animation and video editing and all of these fantastic features that your basic run-of-the-mill illustration software won't support. So Procreate, if you are interested in getting into art as a long-term thing, not just for the Game Jam, I would highly recommend it. It's a super good piece of software, and you'll probably find it serves you very well in the long run if you're looking into keeping going with your art and looking into animation and maybe even video editing, that kind of thing. So yeah, highly recommend that. We've talked about 2D illustration. How do you do 3D stuff? It's tough. I'm just going to be honest with you. I've got into 3D sculpting, I suppose you could call it, within the last couple of years. And it was tricky at first because it's a completely new medium, right? You're dealing with an extra dimension. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around at first, but it's extremely rewarding. Once you get the hang of it, once you go through all the processes of it, once you watch a bunch of tutorials on it, it becomes really rewarding, and I do promise you it's worth your time. So if you're interested in eventually producing 3D art, even if it's not just for a game, it's just 3D art in general, do it. Put your foot down and do it. Don't procrastinate, because I did a lot of procrastinating over kind of getting into 3D art, and it's really worth your time. It really is. So how do you do that? Blender. I know the UI is really scary. I know. I was there. I downloaded it and I opened it up for the first time, and there was a square in the middle, sorry, a cube rather, the dreaded cube in the middle with all of these buttons, and I just thought, oh no, this is going to take me years. It actually didn't. It didn't, because I did the donut tutorial. Some of you will know what I'm talking about. Yeah, do it. Do it. I know it's boring. I know you don't want to make a donut, because why would you want to make a donut? Just do it. Make the donut. It's very useful, because what doing that tutorial does is it takes you through all of the processes that you will need to know when you're making something you actually want to make. So it will take you through sculpting. It will take you through lighting. It will take you through UV. It will take you through basically every step from deleting that cube and making something that you want to make to actually importing it into Unity, for example, and getting it in a game environment. It's great. I know you don't want to make a donut. Make the donut. That's my number one tip of the day. Okay, but what if you don't want to use Blender, which is free, by the way? There's a bunch of other ones I am less familiar with, but I will name drop them here so you can go and research them. ZBrush or ZBrush, good tool, and Maya, which I believe is payment. I know a lot of animation students are loyal to Maya, and I think there are payment plans. There might even be a student plan that you can get access to if you're a student, so pretty good if you're a student. So take a look at it, because there's a lot of tools. Blender is a really common one, and there's a bunch of tutorials. Tutorials are a lifesaver. Go and look at them. YouTube is a great place for that. So yeah, because of a lot of industry professionals use Blender, there's a bunch of tutorials out there, but other tools are available, and Maya is a very popular one as well, I know. And also ZBrush. All the ones I mentioned, very popular, so just go and check them out and have a little explore. Even though you might not have time to produce some amazing 3D assets for this Game Jam specifically, you have your whole life ahead of you. Go explore. Go do 3D art, because it seems really daunting, like I said earlier, But once you get the hang of it, you can do some amazing stuff, and people have done amazing things. Go on Pinterest, look up 3D art, and people have produced these fantastic little sculpts, and big sculpts, and effects. Effects are a big thing that you can do in a lot of 3D illustration programs, so I recommend looking into those too. So you don't have to render smoke, you don't have to manually render it, it just does it for you. Yay! We like convenience, as I said earlier, in the art world. So yeah, go check them out. A lot of them will be free, so very useful. So now's the time in the presentation where I'm going to be talking about my favorite part of the illustrative creative process of making a game, which is character design. Character design is basically when you have your idea, you have a main character, let's say, you kind of have a vague idea of what they look like in your head, but you want to translate that to something visual that you and your friends and the people who are going to be playing the game can see. So how do you do that? Well, if you don't have much experience with illustration, I get it, it can be a very daunting process. How do you get something that you kind of vaguely have in your head onto paper, or the traditional, not the traditional, the digital, I'm making that mistake, the digital medium? How do you make that translation? Well, there's lots of simple steps that you can go through that I will talk about vaguely, and I want to reiterate all of these things I'm about to talk about. I could go into great detail, but it's probably not useful to you right now. I'm just going to give you a general overview of the creative process, and then if you have any specific questions for me, go to the Discord. I will be there. I can help you out. FAQs or just general, I will keep an eye at me if you want to, and we can have a little chat. Art and illustration and that kind of thing can be a very kind of personal thing. You can have a personal issue that you just don't really want to have to ask out loud in front of a group of people, or you're like, oh, I just don't know how to do this specific thing and I just want your help with it. Totally fine. Get in touch with me. I'm happy to help. Yeah, everyone has to start somewhere, so I totally get it. But yeah, how do you go about creating a character design? Well, the first thing I would recommend doing is brainstorming. Get your big mind map out. You know, I mentioned earlier, making a whole image of images, getting lots of pictures from online, getting lots of sources, looking at media that kind of represents the vibe you're going for. Not quite, but pretty close. Get all these ideas at one place. So that might be a Word document, that might be anything at all, actually. Just a place where you can see all of your ideas in one go. Those 2D illustration software that I mentioned earlier, Fire Alpaca, you can just put all your images and stuff in there on one canvas and have a look and think, how do I want to represent all of these ideas that I have for this character in their design? Luckily, with character design, there are lots of useful elements that you can incorporate just into the visual look of the character before they've even spoken a word of dialogue, that you can incorporate into their aesthetic to carry across points about the character, where you're going with them, that are just, yeah, it's visual language, right? It's a way to communicate these ideas that you haven't actually written out, you haven't given a note to the player and said, oh, this is this character and he does this and then they're going to do that. You don't need to do that because your visual language will portray that idea for you. So when I'm talking about visual language, what do I mean? Shape language is one aspect of creating a character that is super useful. And you'll hear it a lot in and amongst character designers who are kind of pretty experienced, and it can be difficult to understand what they're actually talking about. So hopefully this little explanation I'm about to give will be helpful to get into the idea of shape language and what it actually means for you guys. So shape language is when we use simple geometric shapes to translate certain aspects of a character's, usually personality, into their design itself. So have a think for me, and this is a bit of a weird question, but give it a go. What kind of shape do you associate with someone who is sad? I know, I said weird question. It is a pretty weird question. But what do you think? To me, and to a lot of other character designers, they think of kind of round shapes, of droopy shapes, kind of like an arch or something like that. More slumped shapes, more low to the ground. It gives this impression of sadness, melancholy, that kind of vibe that, let's say, you're going for if you're trying to design a sad character. So with that in mind, how would you create the structure, the body language, I suppose, of a sad character? Well, you'd have them be represented by maybe a big kind of blob for their body, and then their head is kind of not standing up straight but drooping down because they're sad. Great, you've already got kind of anatomical references for this character that you're about to design that immediately tell the audience that their thing is that they're sad. it doesn't just apply to sadness, it applies to all other emotions. Let's think of another one, arrogance. Let's say you're trying to create a character that's super arrogant and pompous and, always has his head held up high. Okay, head held up high, we associate that with an arrogant kind of personality, so they're going to be standing up straight, right? They're going to have their head all up above their shoulders, maybe their shoulders are a little bit pointed, maybe their whole body is a bit angular, like if we're going for a cartoon style. That especially allows us to use shape language to our advantage because we can use kind of unrealistic anatomical body parts, like maybe they have really broad shoulders and a super thin waist because they're maybe super athletic and that's why they're arrogant. And maybe they have, because we're kind of using triangular point language, maybe they have a really spiky haircut. And that kind of all feeds into this idea of an arrogant character that you're creating. And again, as I said earlier, this can apply to all sorts of emotions and all sorts of kind of personalities that you're going for. So play around with shape language. Think about these questions like, what shape is a sad shape or an arrogant shape or a greedy shape? And questions start to get difficult to answer when you go past the basic emotions, but you'll see it a lot in animated movies, that they will try and portray their characters in a certain way to represent their personality before they've even spoken anything, as I said earlier. Before you've had any interaction with this character, you kind of know what their vibe is just from looking at them, and shape language can really help with that. So we've talked about the actual physical look of the character's body, and maybe even how the character moves in terms of their shape language, but what about the rest of the character design process? This character is going to want clothes, right? A little outfit that represents what their motivations are, where they've come from. Again, outfits and clothes for characters are really useful for us as character designers and game developers because they tell a story already without even saying anything. You can get the vibe or ambitions even of a character at looking at them without them having to tell you anything about who they are or where they've come from. So let's pick an example. How about an adventurer? Think of just a standard-looking guy. How do you know that he's an adventurer compared to another standard-looking guy? Well, the adventurer might have a sword. A sword is a prop that can tell you that he's going to go on an adventure. Maybe he's going to kill some monsters or something. But he has a sword, which represents that he might have these ambitions, right? A nice little bit of prop usage of kind of clothes, I suppose, for your character. Literally imagine like you're dressing up a mannequin. How would you want to dress up that mannequin to give the impression of the ideas that you have in your head? Another way that you can do that, not just by props, with, as I've been saying, with clothes. So let's say you want to create a character who is a spy. How are you going to do that with their outfit? Well, maybe they want to conceal their identity because they don't want to be seen by people. So maybe they wear a cloak or a mask or something like that. And this is where color schemes I was talking about a little earlier in the context of your general game, but color schemes in terms of a particular character are useful as well, because we often associate certain colors in our heads with certain ideas. So if you're creating a spy character, maybe they have a black mask over their eyes, kind of that shape reminds people of a raccoon, which is a kind of sneaky little animal that people associated with the night and being like sneaking around and that kind of thing. So that's a useful bit of imagery. Also, like the classic like burglar stripy white t-shirt and mask thing and the bag over the shoulder. That's kind of useful, just popular culture imagery that you can incorporate into a design so that people go, oh, that's like a little rogue or something like that. Remember to make use of cliches, I suppose, in character design, because they are actually quite useful, especially if you want to easily just create the impression of the character just from their visual appearance and from their clothes. We've spoken a bit about kind of the theory of creating a good character and how you represent the ideas that you have in your head on your screen in terms of illustration and making a character's personality, but how do we actually do that? What's the practical process of doing that? So first of all, you're going to want to open up your 2D, we'll stick with 2D, not 3D, illustration app. So let's just take Fire Alpaca as an example. You're going to open it up and you're going to create a new canvas of the size that you wish. Can be any size you want. I recommend for game dev stuff usually just a square canvas is quite helpful because it's good for proportions and that kind of thing. And also if you're creating a sprite sheet, which we'll talk about in a bit, having everything on a square canvas as opposed to a landscape or horizontal canvas can be just useful to line everything up at the end. So pick a square canvas if you would like. And get sketching. Sketching, how do you start doing that? Well, all you have to do is get your pen. I like to make it a little bit transparent, and start drawing some shapes. So the head is usually a circular shape, so start drawing a little circle, then make a little triangle underneath the chin. And I'm not going to go into super in-depth how to draw kind of cartoony, I suppose, anatomy of a person, but there's lots and lots of guides online that can tell you the basic shapes that most artists will use to represent certain parts of the body that are just really useful if you're trying to draw a semi-accurate person. So once you kind of have a bone structure, we like to call it, for your character, so that'll be like a circular shape for the head, maybe what pose they're in, you're going to want to start doing your line art, which is basically when you start drawing the more specific details of the character's face and body and clothes. And again, that's going to seem like a pretty daunting process, but if you have a good mind map or board of kind of images that you're taking from, you might even get ideas directly from it, like, oh, what color are their eyes? Maybe you've got a lot of blue images. Okay, maybe pick blue. If you're thinking about their outfit, how do I design their outfit? What should their outfit look like? Well, maybe look at the clothes maybe that you've added to your little visual image chart. Is there an outfit that someone's wearing in those images that you think would particularly suit that character? Well, try and replicate that outfit in your drawing. All stuff like that is good. Pinterest is a really good place for this. I know I've spoken about it a lot, but I can't recommend it enough. Super useful, especially if you know how to use it right, and that just comes with typing in the prompts that are most specific, but also vague enough to encompass a broad range of ideas that will hopefully benefit your character design process, but then it's also specific enough that they're not just random. So yeah, start creating this line art. And again, a good sketch layer always helps. So sketch as much as you want before you get started on the line art, because you should be starting the line art when you're pretty confident with how you want the drawing to end up looking based on the sketch layer. So keep doing sketching until you're happy, and then draw a nice little outline line and details on your character. Now, this is all great if you want to just make an illustration, because after you've done the line art, you just go and color it in, pick some colors out, making sure that they are generally cohesive on the color wheel, so picking colors that are kind of mostly close together, and then maybe a couple of contrasting colors. The color theory is very complicated, but that's basically the general idea. Keep it cohesive, pick a couple contrasts, that's pretty good usually. But once you've colored something in, maybe added a little line of shading, which is usually just a color that's slightly darker than your original color, changed a bit depending on if the lighting's dark or light. Again, lots of tutorials on this. I'm not going to cover it in depth right now because I just want to give you an idea of the process. But once you've basically gone through this process of doing the sketch, the line art, the drawing, any other details you kind of want to add, this is great. But at this point, it's just a drawing. It's not something that you can actually incorporate into your game. So what's a useful drawing for a character design that you're making for a video game that maybe you want to translate into the 3D environment, or you just want to put straight into the game? Well, a good little drawing that you might not actually necessarily put directly into your final product, but I would say is very useful for you in the creative process, is the kind of drawing that shows you all of the details of the character's design without having to worry too much about the posing or even maybe the shape language of how they would normally be posed. We're thinking of a drawing where all of the limbs of the character are kind of out straight so that you can see all the details on the arm, for example, just at a regular angle, and at the legs as well, and at the body. So the character is usually facing the camera directly, with their arms at a distance from each other and their legs straight. So you get a really good visual idea of how the character looks, what the character's wearing, without anything kind of clipping into each other or an arm covering the body or that kind of thing. And mostly in video game development, this is called a T-pose, because the body is shaped like a T, both of the arms are out, and then the legs and the torso are straight. And it just gives a really simple idea of I say simple, I mean clear, a clear idea of what the character should look like and all the elements of the character's design, so that they are presented in an obvious way to the viewer, so that when you go to animate that character, you know kind of where bits should be. So that's just a useful reference. I have a couple of drawings that I've done of not quite T-pose, but pretty much their T-pose characters, so you can see their design. It's always nice to have one from the side profile as well. So that's where the character is kind of not facing straight forward, facing this way or the other way around. And that's so you can see the side profile of that character, and also the back view would be good as well. So that's the T-pose, but just 180 flipped. So the character is facing away from the camera, or you, I guess, as the illustrator. Creating these kind of visual, creating these drawings is just a useful part of the creative process because it allows you to have something to reference back to when you're redrawing that character to make sure that you keep all their details cohesive and consistent with each other. So once you've created that, you're going to want to start creating drawings for your actual game. And the process of that is very simple because you probably have a pretty good idea of what you want your character to look like anyway after you've done all this character design stuff. So what pose would they be in when they're trying to speak to the player or something like that? Probably have a good idea. If you don't, Pinterest, pose references, great source. Try and just replicate it. Find some stuff online. Try not to trace because tracing is kind of skipping the learning process of drawing art. So avoid kind of finding pictures and then just drawing over the top of them because they probably won't reflect the character design that you've created anyway. It'd be very unlikely for that to happen. So instead of tracing, find a picture of a pose that someone's doing, like a cool action pose that you want to draw your character in for your game. Import it onto your canvas, make it a bit transparent, and then draw those anatomical shapes over the body of the person. Then draw your sketch layer, draw the line art of the character that you're actually trying to draw. This process is just really useful for learning anatomy and learning just how the body works on a muscular scale, which is super useful if you're kind of doing semi-realistic stuff. And then once you have let's say you're doing a sprite of someone kind of standing, and maybe because you want to make it a little bit realistic, you're having them kind of move up and down a little bit to simulate realistic movement while they're waiting for something to happen. So while the character is not going forward or backwards, for example, they're just kind of bobbing along. How do you create that? Well, you can probably imagine you have one of them standing like this, one of them standing a little downwards, one of them standing up again. So you kind of create this cycle of maybe, let's say, 2 images, just one up, one down. Repeat that cycle. So let's say you have 2 sprites of your character. What do you do now? How do you get it in the game? Well, it's nice and pretty simple, thankfully. You probably have 2, let's say, square canvases. You can go online, and there's a bunch of websites that will do this for you, or you can do it yourself in like a photo editor. You can go online and you can look up Sprite Sheet Maker, something like that, and there will be a bunch of websites where you can import the drawings that you've done, and they will make for you sprite sheets, which is basically a grid of images of all of the drawings that you've done side by side next to each other. They'll probably form like a bunch of rows and columns after you've done tons of drawings if you're doing a super complicated animation. But for this example, we're just doing 2. So 1 next to each other, like that. And there will be your 2 drawings, one up, one down, of the little bob cycle animation that you're doing. And this is a super useful format because in a lot of game engines, there will be a means of telling the game engine that this is a sprite sheet and that you have a certain amount of sprites in that sprite sheet. So you have 1, 2 sprites in that sprite sheet, or frames, you can call them as well, for the same sprite, the same character. And then what the program will do is it will be able to loop between those 2 images in certain game states. So when you're just standing still, we'll loop between those 2 images and it will create this animation. So you don't actually have to animate anything yourself. You're not actually making the moving lines or anything like that. You are literally just producing the 2 states the character will be in, looping between to produce this animation, and the game engine itself will do that. So this requires programming, obviously, that you can look up how to do. Lots of YouTube tutorials on it. In fact, it's often in like the basic introduction parts of YouTube tutorials because it's an essential part of game development that you will really come across a lot. So yeah. So that's basically how you make a sprite, a simple sprite. And you're probably imagining, yeah, it takes a lot of work. You're having to produce these like handmade drawings, and that is because art is the most time expensive process of making a game. It just is. It takes a lot of effort because you're not only producing stuff, you're also learning on the fly. You're learning how to do all of these new things that you might have not necessarily known before. And every illustrator, no matter how professional they are going to have things that they don't know how to do, are going to have to learn things as they are making a project. And that takes a lot of time because, as I said earlier, you're going to want to scrap stuff that you're not happy with and try again with something new. It's the creative process, and it takes time, but it's very rewarding, and it will produce something that you're actually proud of at the end of it, so it's all worth it. The final thing I'd like to talk to you guys about is just some little tips and tricks generally with producing artwork and just the creative process of it, like I just mentioned. And the main one is don't get frustrated with yourself. It's very easy to. It's very easy to get agitated, especially if you're a perfectionist, that what you're producing right now isn't what you have in your head or isn't quite how you imagined it, isn't what you want your final product to be. And all of this can produce a very frustrating relationship with art in general. And you're going to have that. That's not something that anyone's telling you is unnatural. It is completely natural to feel like you can do better, but you just don't have enough time. It's okay, especially in the context of a game jam. Do what you can right now because you can. No one's stopping you from developing your game further in the future. And if you continue to do a little bit of art every day, and I just mean sketching on paper, not even with your art pad or your pen on your tablet with your 2D illustration software, just paper and pen, have a little sketch, draw something in real life that you see maybe, draw something cool that you found online, anything at all just from the sketch of a hand. Hands are the worst, by the way. Practice makes perfect, as I'm about to say. Just keep doing it because the more you do it, the easier it'll get and the more satisfying the whole process will be. So keep at it. Don't get frustrated with yourself because I really do understand how hard that can be. Use references. People are often afraid of using references because they want to really feel like it's something that they have imagined themselves, and that's totally fair enough, but using references is a really good idea because anything that can help your art feel more lifelike, more true to reality, if that's kind of what you're going for, is good. So for instance, if you're trying to pull off a cool action pose for your character in your artwork, it might be difficult because the perspective of the arm might be strange or the leg might be in a funny position that you can't quite imagine in your imagination. Go in person. Go and find pictures online of someone doing a similar pose. Find a couple that kind of represent the pose you're going for, but not quite, and mash them together. Take bits from them and put them together and see how it looks. Look at real people and how they move. And there are so many websites with just thousands of images of people posing. Literally, I promise you, I'm not joking. There's websites on websites of people who have been photographed in different poses for your use as an artist to replicate. So give it a go. Have a look around. There is a lot of stuff out there, and it's all for you to learn from. So that's great. Another thing I think I should mention at this point is not procrastinating, because a lot of art is tricky and it's learning. Learning is not a simple thing to do. And especially when you're doing something in your own time for fun, it can be frustrating to not be able to do it immediately, which is where the trap of AI comes in. And I know we spoke about that earlier, so I won't go over it again. But yeah, it can be frustrating to not be able to just pull off something from your imagination really easily. But give it a go. Put pen to paper and see what you produce. And if it's not how you quite imagined it, well, that's going to be the case. You're probably just getting started, or even if you're, a practiced artist, you're still not going to be producing stuff that you love. There's always going to be something you can change. And the process of just doing it, of just actively going and saying, okay, I'm going to draw something today. And even if it's not particularly what I like, I'll have done it, and I'll be one step closer to producing that piece of artwork that I actually think, yeah, that's what I had in my head. It's a great feeling, but you can only get there through practice, and it's tough. So just keep at it, keep going, keep improving, and keep enjoying things. And when you want to learn something new, don't shy away from it. Jump right into it. Find all those tutorials online, go onto Pinterest and scroll for hours and find awesome references and just keep doing it, because the more you do it, the better you'll get. It's basically the bottom line. So, just to finish up, I wanted to talk a little bit about how I've actually used these tools and these processes in my experience as in my own time, fun game developer, but also as an illustrator and as someone who has done commissioned illustrative work before. So I think it'd just be useful for you guys to know that it is actually all practical good stuff that I'm telling you. I think the first thing to talk about is the process of creating concept art that I spoke about a little with the T-posing and the character shaping and that kind of thing. We'll put up a few examples of work that I've done in the past with character designs that I've actually translated into game environments. Like this personal project of mine, but also character design in general for other personal projects that I've done, where I've wanted to incorporate certain ideas, and I've created mood boards for those characters and then translated those ideas that I've put on those mood boards into the shape language, but also the clothing and the representation of that character in general, which I've done a lot of work for in the past. So I had a great amount of experience with Blender and Fire Alpaca, and those have proven very, very, very good tools to me. I've also, worked with making a lot of 3D assets within a certain amount of time. And I understand, especially from a game jam perspective, that you do only have a limited amount of time to be producing this, the stuff to put in your game, to make it look great. And I get that it can seem like a time crunch, but when you get to grips with Blender, these are just some examples of the kind of stuff you can do really quickly. Little props, like food items, for example. Once you get used to just the process of producing a model from simple shapes, it becomes actually really, really fun to do quickly. Hotkeys. My Blender experts out there will know that there are lots of hotkeys that you can use for Blender, but you don't have to know them. I don't know all of them. I know a few of them, and they help me get stuff like this done really quickly, so that's super useful. So in general, I think I'd just say that these tools are there to be used. They are there to be made use of in the most efficient ways. They are for artists who don't have much time, because let's think about it, in the real world, when you are practically making assets for a game, maybe you're part of a bigger team, you need to be producing a certain amount of content within a certain amount of time. People will set you deadlines that seem really tricky, and using these tools well and using these creative processes well is something that you can put into practice and effectively produce great art within a short time period, because efficiency is very valuable in art, and all these tools are there to make your efficiency better, make you more efficient. So yeah, use them, and they're a lot of fun to play around with, I can tell you from personal experience. So yeah, highly recommend. And in general, thank you so much for listening. Again, for those doing the Game Jam this year, please just let me know if you have any questions at all. I'm happy to help answer them. And if you're watching in general, then thank you so much for listening.